It's time for the Phil Ferguson Show.
Well, hello there, everybody. This is Phil Ferguson, and you are listening to the cleverly titled The Phil Ferguson Show. I am so delighted that you have joined me. I appreciate you being here very, very much. And of course, if you'd like to support the show, patreon.com/Phil, or you could go leave a 5-star review on iTunes if it still exists, or the Apple Podcast Player app, also at Stitcher, I think is the other place. A couple fun things happened lately. Last night I went to a meeting with TD Ameritrade employees in downtown Chicago, and I got there nice and early because you never know how long it's going to take to drive in a city like Chicago. But I went early enough, and I went inbound in the afternoon, so it was almost a clean shot, only about 5 or 10 minutes of delay from traffic, so that was delightful. So I ended up having some time to kill and walked around Chicago for a little bit and went and checked out Italy, the store that's all Italian products. Italy, the original one I think was in Bologna, by the way. I think I've been to that one, but in Chicago. And I didn't want to buy stuff and then carry it to my meeting. And when my meeting was over, I was going to go back and buy things. And then I just was tired, so I went home. But I got to go back. They got so much cool stuff in there, the wines, the foods, all those things. Maybe I should get paid to do an ad for them. How's that sound? But the TD Ameritrade thing was interesting because it was mostly employees. I thought it was going to be like a thing for advisors, but apparently I got invited to an employee event because I have a new contact person in TD Ameritrade, and they said, hey, I'm going to be at this thing. Why don't you come so we can actually meet in person? So it was nice, a nice little food and drinking kind of thing. And since I was driving back, I had no interest in having any alcohol whatsoever, but had a nice time with it anyway. A little bit later in the show today, we're going to talk about the new news that Schwab intends to buy TD Ameritrade. Yes, I got many, many, many emails from so many of you. Thank you so much for making sure that I'm aware, because the first I heard of it was an actual email from a listener. As one can expect, as the show gets bigger, I get a lot of emails on a certain subject like this one. And so the first 10 or 12 people that sent me an email, I responded, and then I just gave up. So if you were one of the many, many people that sent me an email about the news that Charles Schwab was going to buy TD Ameritrade, and I did not respond to you, my apologies, but I did get a lot of them. So I do talk about that. I do know from the event that I went to that there are quite a few TD Ameritrade employees who are concerned about their jobs. Of course, the companies always say, we're going to get efficiencies from the two companies merging, but we won't let go of any employees. And they always do. So I do expect that there'll be some layoffs or job losses from people at TD Ameritrade, and I wish them the best. But I don't think it's going to materially affect what I do or what my clients see. And again, I talk about that more in the segment, so I'll just save it for that. Other things we've got going on today, I did a kind of a walkthrough of an investment option possibility that someone sent me, and I kind of pseudo real timed it, what I look for and the things that I found that were concerning to me. So that's on an organization called Fundrise, where you can invest in multi-million-dollar real estate projects and make a ton of money, or not. We guess we'll find out. And then after that, the real meat and potatoes of today's episode is an interview with John McNair, who is an attorney in Texas and specializes in estate planning and trusts and wills, stuff like that. So we're going to talk specifically about trusts and the pros and cons and how they work, how they're set up, how they're managed by a trustee, and maybe what some of the tax consequences might be by putting money into a trust, whether it's taxable money or money from an IRA. And I'm still not sure I'm 100% clear on how all of that works, even after doing this job for many years and having done that interview with John. So if you're thinking about a trust, of course, get specific legal counsel, legal advice, hire an attorney within your state because it matters. It varies by state. So we got a lot to talk about, so I'm going to keep this relatively short, take a quick break, and we'll go into some of the fun.
I'm not worried about dying because I'm an atheist, right? Now, I know that this is a Christian country and I stand up for your right to be religious, but please know that you're wrong, right? Please know that you're living in a fantasy land and that after you die, nothing happens. Stop being a fucking child. I'm not scared of dying because I'm an atheist. I know I'll just rot in the ground. Right? I won't even know I'm dead. Do you want to know why? Because I'll be fucking dead. Religious people worry because they believe in heaven. If there's a heaven, there has to be a hell. And everyone who's read that book knows that you've done enough shit to go to hell, right? And that makes it very stressful on your deathbed, doesn't it? Knowing what a prick you are, going, oh, this isn't going to be good. Hey? I don't want to go to heaven. I don't even want the option of heaven. I don't want to exist in a conscious state for the rest of eternity, constantly thinking. I don't like thinking as it is. Where's me passport? Can't punch women in the face. The Bible calls heaven eternal bliss. I don't care how blissful it is. It's eternal. You'll get used to it, and then you'll be fucking bored. And what's hell meant to be like? Fire and brimstone and eternal agony? That's what's written in the Bible. That's God's book. As far as I know, the devil hasn't brought out a book. We don't know his side of the argument, right? If you ask me, the devil and God are having an argument. The devil's being a bigger fucking man. Because God's just writing shit about him. And the devil's going, I'm not even going to fucking comment, son, if you talk about me like that.
I've got a very different segment here today. This is about Charles Schwab, and if you haven't heard it yet, it's been announced on November 25th of 2019 that Charles Schwab is buying TD Ameritrade. Now, this may not be particularly of interest to the average listener, but for listeners who are also clients of Phil, clients of Polaris Financial Planning, you are probably aware that we use TD Ameritrade as the qualified custodian to hold all of your accounts. So it's something that a lot of listeners have already emailed me, even when this was a rumor, and now it's been formally announced, and I expect to get more emails, which is perfectly fine. It's something I do know about, and of course, you'll know that once you hear this, but I have no problem with people sending me updates and information. Sometimes the first time I hear about something is when listeners of the show send me emails, so that's all cool. Don't worry about it. But I wanted to go over, what do we know? First of all, not a whole lot. I'm not generally a big fan of mergers, and of course, it could potentially affect my business as well as my clients, so I'm extra sensitive to it. I have a story here in front of me from an organization called Financial Advisor IQ, which is actually something that TD Ameritrade bought in the last couple of years. So this is from their perspective, and it's pretty clear on some things. And then, of course, you've got the general corporate bullshit, where they say nothing will change, at least for now. Of course, things will change. I don't know that it's going to be bad. I'm just saying things will change. A couple things here. They have, one, what is happening? And I'm going to read from the text here. It says, the Charles Schwab Corporation and TD Ameritrade Holding Corporation have entered into an agreement for Schwab to acquire TD Ameritrade in an all-stock transaction valued at $26 billion. Our combined client experience will bring together the best of Schwab's and TD Ameritrade's innovative and client-centric platforms, products, and services. These include leading trading and wealth management platforms, custody platforms and technology, investor education, award-winning services, retirement services, banking, asset management, and a unique satisfaction guarantee. Together, under the respected Charles Schwab brand, we will continue to challenge the status quo and pool our resources and expertise to fully transform lives and investing for the better. End quote. So that's where they start with. So a couple things that are clear. They are not calling this a merger. It is clearly Charles Schwab is buying TD Ameritrade. Don't know that that's any better or any worse, but it's clear, and that's kind of nice. I like clarity. So Charles Schwab, and it's a name that I don't have any particular problem with. I've considered using them as the advisor or qualified custodian, qualified custodian for clients in the past. So I don't have any concerns with that. I don't have any real problems with that. But change always brings a little bit of anxiety, which is why I wanted to talk about this and include it in a show as quickly as possible. And if I learn new information in the future, I will share that with you where allowed or where relevant, I guess. One of the interesting things is that there's also a TD Bank owns part of TD Ameritrade, and it will cap out at owning only 9.9% of Schwab, and the additional shares that it would have owned are going to be non-voting shares. So that's for very specific and technical reasons that as long as you own less than 10% of a company, you're not considered an active owner, and you have to do different filings. So it is clearly the intent of Schwab and TD Ameritrade for TD Bank to not own 10%. They're going to own 9.9 is the cap. And some, I don't know, it's just a technical little thing. One thing that might actually be good for clients that use TD Ameritrade now is you're probably going to get a better website. That's one of the heartburns that I've had, and I know a lot of my clients have had. The TD Ameritrade website is not always the sexiest. Let's just say that. So you've got that to look forward to, that you're probably going to end up getting a better website. A couple things here about this is they are currently expecting it to close, to be formalized in the second half of 2020. I'm imagining really late in 2020 because they have to go through a lot of regulation hurdles and government approvals and everything like that. So pretty much nothing will change for the next 10 to 12 months, maybe 13 months. And then they had this other section here where it says the integration is expected to take between 18 to 36 months. So a year and a half to 3 years, even after the official merger. And if I understand the Charles Schwab and TD Ameritrade business models correctly, and I'm not 100% sure that I do, I think they make far more money off people that do trading than people that sit by and passively own index funds. So kind of in a way, it might be a perk that we kind of get ignored a little bit, or we're not the first priority of people that things are going to change. So I expect it to be slow, and it will take years for most of this to really reflect on anyone that's a client of Polaris, or anyone that has an advisor that uses TD Ameritrade as their custodian. And of course, I dream that this transition will be smooth and effortless. And of course, it's still not even approved yet. It's just announced. But if it's approved and it all goes through, I would expect that everyone who has an account at TD Ameritrade will eventually have an account at Charles Schwab, because they've made it perfectly clear that I guess that it's Schwab is buying TD Ameritrade. So they're going to be using the Schwab brand. So that's what I know for now, which is, I know not a whole lot, but I didn't want anyone to think that I was hiding behind something or that I had any grave concerns. It's just, the way the world works sometimes. I've gone through mergers before, and some have worked well and some have not. But if you have specific questions, or if you want a link, copy of the link to what I'm referring to here, I'll be happy to send it to you. Of course, you can contact me anytime, phil@polarisfinancialplanning.com.
You're listening to The Phil Ferguson Show.
What did this person who made this world intend it for? And this is the point where you think, well, it fits me very well. You know, the caves and the forests and the stream and the mammoths. He must have made it for me. I mean, there's no other conclusion you can come to. And it's rather like a puddle waking up one morning. I know they don't normally do this, but allow me, I'm a science fiction writer. A puddle wakes up one morning and thinks, this is a very interesting world I find myself in. It fits me very neatly. In fact, it fits me so neatly, I mean, really precise, isn't it? It must have been made to have me in it. And the sun rises, and he's continuing to narrate the story about this hole being made to have him in it. And the sun rises, and gradually the puddle is shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. And by the time the puddle ceases to exist, it's still thinking, it's still trapped in this idea that the hole was there for it. And if we think the world is here for us, we will continue to destroy it in the way that we've been destroying it.
This Investing Skeptically segment is on a thing called Fundrise. It's some kind of real estate-ish type of investment that a friend of the show sent me. I'm going to call him that, a friend of the show. And I started looking at it and found some interesting things, and I thought I would just kind of share the thought process and what I see and what I do when someone sends me something like this. And one of my default rules has always been, I don't invest in anything I don't fully understand. And after I fully understand it, I'm probably not going to invest in it anyway, because once you get the details, it may not be a good investment. So when someone comes to me and says something like, you've got to get in this right now, or it's the ground floor, yada, 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 I'm not interested in that kind of thing. That's not something that Phil is interested in. I do the really boring, safe, relatively safe, secure stock market, bond market investing, because I know that really well. I know how it works really well. I think I understand it. And despite sometimes significant drops in the stock market, history has shown that in the long run, if you just buy and hold, you're going to make a lot of money. And I'm okay with that. I don't have to make a lot of money really fast. But anyway, Fundrise, you can find it at fundrise.com. And I go to their homepage, and it talks about how they have an 8.7 to 12.4% historical annual returns. So I'm wondering, like, why is there a variance there? Why is there this range? What is their historical return? Is it 8.7 or is it 12.4 or something in between? So that's kind of odd, and I think I may have figured that out later. But as I scroll down the page, they show these beautiful real estate pictures of townhomes, condos, office spaces, things that apparently they've been involved with and helping to make money. And then when you go further down the page, there's this part that caught my eye, something I look for is average annualized returns. And it says 12 to 8 to 11 to 9% per year. 2018 made 9.11% average annualized return. Not 100% sure what that means, but that's the number they've shown. Now, if you want to invest in real estate, and if you want to invest in something that at least I understand and I know, you can go to the Vanguard REIT Fund. We've talked about that before, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it, but the symbol is VGSLX. That's the Vanguard Admiral share class of their REIT fund, and their 10-year average return has been 12.89%. So over 10 years, 12.89%. No reason to think you're going to get that going forward. No reason to think you're not going to get that forward. Past performance does not indicate future results. You know all those things. So real estate is a way that you can make money by holding either a REIT or buying your own land, or maybe even this thing. I just don't know exactly what it is that they're doing, so I wanted to look into it a little bit. But then they have this graph that shows cumulative total returns, and it goes from 2014 to 2019. And the number for 2014 on this line graph is really close to zero. It's really close to zero. And then 15, it's really close to zero. And then 16, it's 5 million. 17, it's 15 million. And then by the time you get to 19, it's like 67, 68 million. It's kind of a low resolution graph here, so I'm not sure exactly where that number is. And cumulative total returns, and it's presented next to the averaged annualized returns. So you might think, oh, this great big chart shows how much money I could have made if I invested in 2014. Well, that's not what it is. It's the cumulative total returns of everything that they have invested in. So you didn't start with 0 or 1 million and then 5 years later have 68 million. That's insane, but that's the way it looks. So it's all the money they've brought in, all the things that they've bought, all the things that they've completed, and that's how much money every single investor has cumulatively made, added all together. I don't know if they meant it to look like a long-term growth chart of a regular investment like a stock or a mutual fund, but that's what it looks like to me, but it clearly is not. So penalty points for being deceptive in the graph. And of course, if they're going to start off by being deceptive, I'm starting to lose a lot of interest. Not that I really had much to begin with. Another thing I found, because sometimes if you look at the bottom, there can be disclosures or little links to information. One of the little gems that I found says, quote, "The hypothetical performance results shown do not represent the results of actual investment activity, but were achieved by means of the retroactive application of a model designed with the benefit of hindsight. Investors should carefully review the additional information presented on the platform as part of any hypothetical comparison." What? So are they saying that the numbers they just gave you didn't actually happen? Great. So they just created hypothetical numbers. So that's cool. Other documents, I found out that everything that they buy, you have to sign up and become a client of a financial planner, which, okay, it's kind of like me, so I can't complain about that too much. And they get 1%, and I get 1% or less, so I can't complain about that too much. But it's just something that you need to really dig deep to figure out what it is. So it looks like they run about 15 different funds, which would be really close to an ETF or a mutual fund, but they're not. And you put money in there, and then inside of that fund, they invest in different construction and real estate transactions, and they hope that they're going to make money, and then you get part of that as a dividend, which could work out just great, but will it? And of course, there's other things here that confuse me. So you have the website Fundrise, and then you have a financial advisor, investment advisor company that has a different name. And then all of these apparently are owned by Rise Companies Corporation. So whatever it is. But another thing I found in disclosure documents is it says, although Rise Companies Corporation intends to complete a transaction such as the sale or registered initial public offering, providing liquidity to shareholders within 5 years from the completion of this offering. So each fund is offered, and they sell so many shares of the fund, then that fund goes and invests in things. And they want to provide liquidity within 5 years of completion. Its governing documents do not require it to pursue such a liquidity transaction. Market conditions and other factors could cause a delay beyond 5 years. So when you're investing in this thing, if I'm reading this correctly, and I'm not sure that I am, you could put in $100,000. You may not have access to that $100,000 for a period of 5 years or more. And that violates one of my investing rules / goals for my personal money and for all of my clients, is that if you need the money out, you can get it out within a couple of days, maybe a couple of weeks to have a check clear and everything and get to your bank. But 5 years or more, I'm not interested in that kind of thing. And maybe by locking it up for 5 years or more, you can make 10 or 11%, but you can make 10 or 11% without locking your money up for 5 years. So why do I want to do that? Another random little thing that I found, I went through what's called the ADV Part 2 for the advisor part of this collective, and this is called Fundrise Advisors. So we've got 3 or 4 different names going here. And I found this fascinating, and I finally found some paragraph here, or text here. It says, Fundrise Advisors relies on Rise personnel to perform services on its behalf, and Fundrise Advisors currently has no employees and does not currently intend to hire any employees who will be compensated directly by Fundrise Advisors. So there's this mutual, financial advisor. There's a financial advisor company that has a website, and you go to the website and you contribute money, and the financial advisor charges 1%, but there's actually no employees there at all doing the work for Fundrise Advisors. They all work for Rise. So that's also weird. Not necessarily wrong, but maybe something I don't understand. And again, with this idea, if I don't understand it, I really don't want to invest with it. I also found another disclosure document for the Fundrise IPO. And so I think what they're doing is they're selling shares of their company, and you buy the shares of the company, and then you kind of pick and choose which theoretical portfolio you want the money to be invested in. And then they have these dividends. And I thought I saw somewhere that at the end of it all, when they close the books on this and liquidate everything, they give you back all your money, and they keep 15% of it. I can't find that again. So I'm not sure where that was stated, and I'm pretty sure it's in this disclosure document, which is, let's see, how many pages is this? 252 pages. So if you read all 252 pages and still like this, maybe it's the right kind of investment for you. But this is a lot of details and confusion on my part, and maybe it's because I'm a moron. I don't know, but it's just looking like a lot of things that, and I don't really know exactly what I'm investing in. I get the impression that I'm putting money into a building to be repaired or bought or built, but how that actually happens in the details, and if that building defaults, if the main company goes broke or bankrupt, or someone embezzles money, am I on the hook? Am I protected by investment protections like I would be at Fidelity, Schwab, T. Rowe Price, Vanguard? I don't know. I haven't figured those things out. So my research in this I spent way more time than I wanted to, but nothing is helping me get past the initial idea that I'm not interested. If anything, it makes me more and more concerned. So that's just some thoughts kind of as I went through this in pseudo real time. So if this segment sounded a little blocky, it's because I would pause and read some more and then record some more. But that's Fundrise. Hope you enjoyed. The Phil Ferguson Show is for educational purposes only. Nothing said on the show should be interpreted as personalized investment advice. Your investment should be based on your situation, and you should consult with your financial advisor before taking any action. The show may contain ads. These ads are placed into the show by the hosting company after I finish recording and editing. I have little control over the content of the ads, and you should not assume that I support their products or claims. If you choose to support the show via the new Patreon page, that support does not create an advisor-client relationship.
If you support the Catholic Church, isn't that like the same thing as being an R. Kelly fan?
Okay, everybody. Next, we have John McNair, and he is an attorney in Dallas, Texas, and he is a specialist in trusts. How are you, John?
I'm doing well.
And did I have that correct? You're a specialist in trusts?
Estate planning.
Fair enough.
Trust, wills.
Yeah. So
general.
Now, one thing that you were on the show, and let's see, hang on, I had a note here. It's been a while. It was April 6th of 2018. Almost 2 years ago, a few months shy, we talked about this stuff. That was show number 256, in case anyone wants to go hear you again. We talked about some of that stuff way back then. But one thing I do want to point out, and I think it's something you would point out if I didn't do it anyway, is that laws vary sometimes significantly from state to state. Would someone from outside of Texas want to hire you? Should they hire you? What are your thoughts on that?
No, somebody that lives in a different state should hire an attorney from their state for any kind of estate planning or probate matters, because those are very state-specific rules. And I'm not licensed in any other state. So
fair
if they have
enough.
a Texas matter, I can help them.
And the last thing I want to go over with that, of course, is you and I might agree on something. First of all, I'll re-point out to my listeners, I am not an attorney. I'm not trying to pretend to be one, but I do know some things about estate planning and trusts. And John and I could agree on something, but it could still be a bad idea for you, or even illegal or not legally permissible for you, depending on the state that you live in. So please, of course, as we were just talking about, consult your own attorney within your state before making any actual decisions on anything. Now that we got some of that disclaimer crap out of the way, how you doing, John?
I'm doing well. Doing well.
Well, I've got near freezing
Trying to
temperature.
get caught up from being back in the office after Thanksgiving.
Yeah, I tried to avoid work, but there were some things, and you know, I get news every once in a while, and I just heard from one of my clients this morning that they had a long-term job that just spontaneously ended this morning. So Merry Christmas to them. They're going to go into the holidays unemployed, so we're going to have to try to figure out how that changes their life. But last time we talked, you worked for another law firm. Where do you work now?
So I went out on my own in May of this year, May 2019. So I have my own law firm now.
That's nice. And is that
in Dallas,
called the J. McNair Dallas Law PC?
That is the name.
Wow. What lucky guess I had. So we're going to talk about trust.
www.mcnair-dallaslaw.com.
I like it. Thank you.
Check me out. That's the website.
Thank you for throwing that in there. One of the things we talked about, and I want to talk about again, is trusts. Do you have kind of like a monetary threshold where you think a trust is a good idea?
Let's talk about when we would be using trust.
Okay.
There's two different times when people use trust. Well, yes, two different times, while they're alive and then after they're deceased.
Yeah.
And while they're alive, the issue is what benefit would they receive from creating a trust for themselves, their own trust. And that might, in fact, be a situation where it wouldn't take that large amount of property, $100,000, $200,000,
okay,
a house and a $100,000 CD. You might benefit from a revocable trust for yourself for the many reasons that a revocable trust might be useful. After you pass away, Whether to create irrevocable trust for your spouse or descendants depends on your situation, but generally speaking, the benefit that you can give to them from that kind of trust is creditor protection and divorce protection. And that's tremendous, but maintaining an irrevocable trust is a bit more of an administrative burden than a revocable trust requires tax returns each year, for example. So you probably are not going to want to create a trust for a spouse or a child unless it's, I don't know, $300,000, $500,000. At $300,000, you're on a kind of on the borderline. At $500,000, I'm comfortable saying that's a useful number for creating trust for other people. But while you're alive, you may have quite a bit less than $300,000, $200,000, $100,000, $150,000, and it still might be useful to create a revocable trust for yourself.
Fair enough. Now, we threw out a couple big words already, revocable and irrevocable. That sounds like a big dividing point to me in the trust world. If you think that that's a fair analysis, tell me a little bit about the differences between the two.
Right. So when you create a trust for yourself, you are typically creating a revocable trust, a trust that you can amend, alter, revoke, terminate at any time during your lifetime. It is very very attractive in the sense that it's very flexible for that reason. The purposes that you might want to do that are twofold. I personally think it is a better management tool for your assets should you become incapacitated. And if your assets are owned by that trust when you pass away, you do avoid probate. Texas is not a tremendously difficult state for probate, but there may be other states where some of your listeners may live where it may be a more difficult process, and having property in a trust avoids that. But in Texas, my main reason for doing it is for management should you become incapacitated.
Fair enough. So in that case,
and an irrevocable.
No, I'm just going to follow up on that a little bit. So you have the revocable trust that is basically an extension of you. It would have your Social Security number. Is that correct?
That's right. It provides no creditor protection.
Okay.
In I would say all states, your creditors have the same access to your assets in that trust as they did before if they were in your own name. Okay. It's not really used as a creditor protection device.
Fair enough.
And as you say, it doesn't exist for income tax purposes. You don't even have to have a separate tax ID number.
Right. But the convenience you might have is that if it's for yourself and your own benefit, of course, you probably would name yourself as the trustee of the trust, and you could do kind of whatever you wanted to. And then if you became incapacitated, hopefully somewhere in the trust it says who is the secondary and tertiary trustee, and they would just step in and take over if you were ruled unable to manage your own affairs. Does that sound right?
Well, if you became incapacitated, and usually you have a procedure set forth in the trust, not ruled, that implies there might be a court involved.
Okay.
You're trying to avoid courts in this situation. You would typically have a doctor's opinion letter that the successor trustee would obtain, and that would be the way to determine somebody's incapacity.
Okay. And now let's go ahead to the irrevocable. How is that different?
So irrevocable, by its nature, means that you can't change it, you can't amend it in any way, you can't revoke it, you can't terminate it. And 99.99% of the time, you are creating an irrevocable trust for somebody else. Either during your lifetime, you're making gifts into a trust that are irrevocable, and after you pass away, if you make transfers to other persons in trust, they are by definition irrevocable because you, the grantor, are not going to be around to alter, amend, or revoke it anymore.
And of course, the irrevocable trust, whether it's created as irrevocable or becomes irrevocable, does it become its own unique entity as viewed by the IRS and has its own number?
Correct. It is a separate taxable entity. Well, without going down a long rabbit trail, I will mention that there is a category of trust for income tax purposes that the IRS recognizes called, quote, grantor trust, end quote. And a grantor trust is actually an irrevocable trust for somebody else where you can't get the gift back, you the grantor, but for income tax purposes, the trust is taxed to you as if you still owned it. And that's a very useful estate planning technique, and it's used all the time. Attorneys love grantor trust, but that's not normally, I would say, the reason, what's going to be happening with an irrevocable trust. It's typically going to be a trust that has its own tax ID number, files its own tax return, and potentially pays its own income taxes.
Well, and it's funny because you must have been reading my mind. I was just going to go into that. A trust that generates income. It's not earned income because it's not working. It's just income. But the tax rate on that income could be materially higher. Is that your understanding?
Right. So the way a trust works for income tax purposes is that they have the exact same brackets as an individual does. However, those brackets are very compressed. The trust gets to the highest individual income tax bracket at some ridiculously low number, and I'm not exactly sure what it is right now. I think it's around $12,000 or $13,000 of income.
I would say that they don't have the same.
Don't quote me on that one.
They don't have the same brackets. Is not the word. They have the same tiers. So when you go 24 to 28 to 32%, but the brackets are really small. And I think again off the top of my head, and someone can double check, but it's going to be around the ballpark of $12,000. You are now in the top tier. And so someone might hear that and go, well, that makes it crazy. Why would I want an irrevocable trust if I could pay that tax? And that's because you want to have control as a trade-off for the possible high taxes. But in theory, again, if the trust is for someone else, it should be spitting off money to help somebody. And so it doesn't stay in the account, and therefore you don't have the taxes. Does that logic sound right?
Right. So the way those type of trusts work is that income is going to be taxed to somebody if it's taxable income. If it's interest or dividends that have been earned by the investments inside that trust, that taxable income has got to be reported by somebody. It can either be reported by the trust if it retains the income for the entire year and never distributes it. However, if it distributes the income to the trust beneficiaries, your children or spouse, whoever you've set the trust up for, then the trust will issue what's called a K-1 form, and that form is attached to the tax return of the beneficiary, and the beneficiary reports that income on their tax return if they received it.
Sure.
And then they would have the advantage of getting the much broader tiers that we talked about.
Excellent. Absolutely. Can one of the phrases I like to use, and I don't know if it's a legitimate legal thing, but with a irrevocable trust, one can manage from the grave. How long can one do that?
I recommend if I have a trust large enough to create for a child, for example, that it be for their lifetime. Now, this gets into another rabbit trail, a law called the Rule Against Perpetuities.
Okay.
There are a few states, a very few, that have eliminated what's called the Rule Against Perpetuities, and that's a rule that limits the length of time that you can keep a trust open. And the old English rule from back many centuries ago that came down to us from the common law and still exists in all 50 states, except for the few that have eliminated it, is that a trust can only last for lives in being plus 21 years. So, if your children are alive, but they're too young to have your grandchildren, when you pass away, then that trust can last until the children pass away, and when the grandchildren reach age 21, it theoretically must terminate in favor of the grandchildren. If your grandchildren were alive and you were in a state that had not eliminated the rule against perpetuities, you could have it last for the entire life of your children and your grandchildren, and then terminate into the lives of the great-grandchildren. And, of course, if you're in one of those states that has eliminated the rule against perpetuities, you could have it last for many generations. I'm not a big fan of those. I think they create more problems than they solve, but you could do that.
Yeah. Now, one thing that we had mentioned real quickly, and I don't know that you're going to have the exact numbers, and maybe I can help out here a little bit. You mentioned the expense of running a trust. What might those expenses be?
I would say the primary expense is going to be, for an irrevocable trust, the filing of the tax return each year.
Okay.
If you hire a CPA to do that, then you've got the cost of keeping up with that. I suppose if it was a really large trust that was doing a lot, I think this would be very unusual. You might even have a trustee hire a bookkeeper or something to keep up with it, though I think that would be pretty unusual.
Right. Now, I've also seen a lot of people have trusts where they assign control or management of the trust to a bank or some kind of other trust entity that charges fees, and those can get quite expensive.
Yes, for sure. And when I talk to clients about using financial institutions as trustees, always we start with who are family members that can serve as trustees. I think the vast majority of clients would prefer that their own family members act as trustees of these types of trusts. In fact, if we're creating a trust for a child, the vast majority of the time we're going to have the child be their own trustee. But there may be times a child that has issues where you would want a bank to be the trustee instead of the child, for example, and you're right, they are going to charge a fee. My experience has been that their fee is based on the assets under management. So it's probably going to be around 1%, give or take some basis points, of the value of the trust assessed each year.
Fair enough, fair enough. One of the questions I get on a regular basis, and I want to pick your brain on this, if someone is doing this estate planning idea and they're getting close to retirement and they happen to have a lot of their money inside of an IRA or a handful of IRAs or Roth IRAs, should the trust be named as the beneficiary of the IRA upon their death?
Well, typically naming a revocable trust as a beneficiary is not a good idea. However, if you are creating irrevocable trust, say for children, after you pass away or after you and your spouse pass away, I personally think that each child's irrevocable trust has a beneficiary. Say you had 3 children, and you created 3 irrevocable trusts for them to receive your non-retirement assets in thirds, and you named each child's trust as a 1/3 beneficiary of your IRA. That is very beneficial for 2 reasons. Number one, there was a Supreme Court case several years ago that said that inherited IRAs don't necessarily have the same creditor protection benefits that an IRA would have if it was the owner themselves going through bankruptcy. Now, that's going to depend in part on state law, but to avoid that problem, to provide creditor protection to your child, the IRA is the trust as a beneficiary of the IRA is a very useful tool. The second reason, and this is very state specific, but it has to do with marital property laws. So I believe there are 8 community property states in the United States. I'm not positive about that number. The vast majority are not community property. Some states have interesting community property laws. For example, Texas has interesting community property laws. If your child inherits your IRA, an inherited asset is a separate property asset for community property purposes and can't be partitioned over to an ex-son-in-law or daughter-in-law if there's a subsequent divorce. However, there is a rule in Texas that income generated by separate property is community property. So if that IRA earns dividends and interest for the next 15 years after you have inherited that IRA from your father, and then you divorce, then you're going to have to prove what's separate and what's community. You've had a commingling of the IRA. And assets acquired during the marriage are presumed to be community. So if you acquired stocks and bonds during that 15 years inside that portfolio that weren't there when your dad died, you have to prove that they came from the separate property. If it goes into that trust, at least in Texas, you have additional protection against that kind of a problem. So for both creditor protection and divorce protection reasons, naming an irrevocable trust for a child may be very beneficial.
Fair enough. Now, I'm also under the understanding that there might be a downside to putting an IRA into an irrevocable trust, and that you might lose the generations-long possibility of deferring taxes. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so let's go down another kind of complicated rabbit trail, but let me try to make this simple. When somebody dies and they give an IRA to somebody other than a spouse, that somebody else, that beneficiary, has to start taking out what are called required minimum distributions from that IRA every single year for the rest of their actuarial life expectancy calculated at the time that the person died. And that's a good thing. You're stretching it out over a very long time.
Right.
A parent dies and the child is 40. Well, a 40-year-old has a very long life expectancy, so they don't have to pull out as much, and they can let it grow tax-free within the IRA, and taxes deferred is a good thing. With a trust, the IRS makes life much more complicated than it should be. The IRS says that a trust is just an amalgamation of a bunch of beneficiaries, and we want to be able to identify the oldest beneficiary, and that beneficiary is going to be the, quote, measuring life for how fast those required minimum distributions go out to that trust. So if you do planning correctly, that should never be a problem, because an attorney can draft the trust in one of two ways to make sure that those rules aren't a problem. One is called a conduit trust, not my favorite, but it is one way to resolve that problem. A conduit trust has language that says every time a required minimum distribution goes out to this trust, which is for the benefit of both my child and my grandchildren, it must be distributed to my child every year. Well, that defeats the purpose of accumulating the property in the trust for creditor protection and divorce protection, but it certainly is recognized by the IRS as a way to avoid the measuring life problem, and we know the child is the measuring life. The other way to draft is something called an accumulation trust. An accumulation trust says, when required minimum distributions go into this trust for my child, it may be accumulated. You don't have to distribute it. But nobody can ever be a beneficiary of the required minimum distribution payments into this trust who is older than my child. So if we have language like that, we know the child is the measuring life. The IRS can look through that trust and see that the child is the measuring life, and we've solved that problem.
I'm also thinking that I thought there was some kind of rule that if an IRA goes into an irrevocable trust, the money has to be withdrawn from the IRA over and all the taxes paid in a 5-year time period. Am I just completely wrong, or is there some alternate scenario that creates that situation?
That is a extremely rare default provision. For example, if there's an irrevocable trust and they can find a measuring life, it's going to be paid out over the course of that measuring life, period. Now, there are some beneficiaries where they can't determine a measuring life, and that's where the 5-year rule applies.
I see.
And where does that apply? It would apply if you named your estate as the beneficiary. 100% certain it would be the 5-year rule.
Okay.
If you named a charity, the 5-year rule would apply, but who cares? It's going to a charity, and it's not going to be a taxable event anyway. Or if you named, well, those are the two major ones.
Sure.
If you named a corporation, which is weird. I've never heard of anybody naming a corporation or other business entity as a beneficiary, but
you could.
So, yeah, the 5-year default rule is very rare because really it's based on, can we find a measuring life?
Okay.
Now, the IRS might find the measuring life is Aunt Tilda, who's 80, who is a contingent beneficiary. If the children and grandchildren predecease me, that might be a problem, but it won't be 5 years.
It would be her life expectancy.
Right.
Okay, fair enough. So if I had $1 million IRA and I have 3 kids, because we've been using the 3-kid example, would I set up 3 different trusts and then split the IRA into 3 different beneficiaries and name each one of the 3 trusts as the beneficiaries?
Right. You would name by percentages, not by dollar figures, but by percentages, each one of those irrevocable trusts for the 3 children. And then after you pass away, the custodian of that IRA, whatever that financial institution is actually going to set up 3 inherited IRAs for each trust, and then those IRAs are just going to sit there in the decedent's name, and they're going to pay out to those 3 separate trusts over the measuring life of that primary beneficiary.
And so in that scenario, the children could still enjoy a lifelong of tax deferment because it's an IRA?
Yes, as long as they had the right language in it, either the conduit language or the accumulation trust language.
Excellent. Of course, there's other types of IRAs. One that I oversee for a family member is a special needs trust. Tell me a little bit about what that is.
So special needs trust is one that is established for somebody that is receiving now or might very well in the future receive some governmental benefit, typically to pay for long-term care. Although it doesn't necessarily have to be that. There's 2 major governmental benefits that you're trying to preserve with a special needs trust. If it's a beneficiary under the age of 65, you're trying to preserve their ability to qualify for SSI benefits. And SSI benefits are very useful because they don't get much money. But if you qualify for SSI, you also qualify for Medicaid. And Medicaid is very useful because that'll pay for all of the health needs of that person. It's basically like a health insurance policy for a person who probably, because of their incapacity, might not be able to qualify for an affordable one in any event. So if it's somebody over 65, then you're trying to preserve their ability to qualify just for Medicaid, which could help pay for long-term care services for that person.
And the situation that I'm involved with...
And the way you do that...
Go ahead.
And the way you do that is you give the trustee complete discretion to distribute to that person. You might have language in there that you hope that they will do it in a way that will not interfere with the beneficiary's ability to qualify for the governmental benefits. But as long as you give them complete discretion, then both for SSI and the vast majority of state Medicaid programs, that's going to make sure that the property in the trust does not make them ineligible for those benefits.
Right, because the case that I have, it also helps with Section 8 and food stamps. As an example, I can't, and under any cases, take money out of the trust to buy groceries because then I'm providing food and this person could lose their food stamps, which they need to buy groceries on an ongoing basis. So it can get kind of tricky and complicated. Are there any kind of trust or estate topics that we haven't covered that you think people should know about and maybe they don't? See, I caught you with an open-ended question.
We really haven't talked. Yeah, we really haven't talked about estate taxes. I think most people know this now, but maybe beat a dead horse.
Yeah.
Almost nobody needs to worry about estate taxes anymore. The exemption amount a couple of years ago went up to an astronomical level of $11 million, roughly $11 million. It's pegged to inflation, so it's gone up since it originally started. It's roughly $11 million per person. If your estate is less than $11 million, then you don't have to worry about estate taxes. And if you're a married couple, if it's less than $22 million. So, except for the ultra wealthy, estate taxes are no longer something we need to worry about.
Fair enough. Well, John, I know you got a busy day ahead of you, so I thank you so much for spending some time with us to talk about trusts and a little bit about estate planning.
You're listening to The Bill Ferguson Show.
One bit of fun that I had at the event that I went to that I talked about way long ago, an hour ago, at the beginning of the show, it just popped into my head. Had some fun because, you know, we're talking about people and I ask, what do they do? And they say, so do you work for TD Ameritrade? Or, oh, no, you have your own business. And every once in a while they'll say, how do you get clients? And it's a weird thing because the single hardest thing, I think, for virtually every single financial advisor, financial planner, investment advisor, registered investment advisor, whatever words we want to use, the single hardest thing in this industry is finding new clients. That's why people send out mailers. That's why they do seminars, webinars, free dinners, free lunches, informational meetings at the library, whatever, because you have to get out and be known. And for me, the podcast does that. My involvement in the secular community does that. And it didn't happen right away. It was something I had done for years and years and years. And I've been marketing Polaris Financial Planning for 12, 13, 14 years. I've kind of lost track here somewhere to the secular movement by tabling, going to conferences, having ads in the program, name on the lanyard, all that kind of stuff. So every once in a while, someone would say, how do you get all these clients? And I would say, well, through my podcast. And then they go, oh, is it an investment podcast? And, you know, I'm having a nice time. I'm playing with these people. And I said, yeah, it's about half investments and half atheism. And I've done this enough times that I know pretty likely what the look is going to be. And I get it. And I get that look and they go, I'm sorry, you said finance and what? And what? And I said, atheism. I promote an atheistic worldview, a secular worldview. I think the world would be a better place if we didn't have religion in it. And they're like, ah. And some people are like, that's interesting. And you can see that they now want to end the conversation. But then you get other people who go, oh, dude, I'm with you. There was also a couple other advisors that were there. And the one guy was like, well, that wouldn't be my thing. And I said, well, what's your thing outside of investing? And he said his thing is hockey. And I said, like professional hockey, the sport? And he says, yeah, I'd love it. And I said, can you eat, sleep, and dream and talk about hockey every day of the year? And he goes, pretty much do already. And I said, dude, do a half hockey, half finance show. And he's like, that doesn't make any sense. And I go, investments in atheism doesn't really make any sense either. But if you can make it work, you can have a lot of fun. Like I get to talk about two things, maybe the third thing is politics, that I enjoy. And people listen to the show, and hopefully some of you enjoy it. But if you don't, bugger off and go listen to something else. That's okay. But those of you who are here, I'm delighted. The one thing that shocked me, I guess, was when people would look up the Phil Ferguson show, and one guy had his iPhone, and he pulls up the app, and he says, you have over 300 reviews, and 290 of them are 5 stars, which the way he said it sounded impressive. So thank you all for over the years giving me 290 out of about 300 of the reviews are 5 stars. I know a couple of the really bad reviews were because I swear. Well, that's what I do. So shit happens. But he seemed to be really, really impressed. So it was kind of nice. So thank you. Thank you for that very much. And like I said in the very beginning, something you can do to help me out. A couple things. One, you can go kick in a few bucks at Patreon, patreon.com/Phil. Just $1 per show is what I ask for. It'd be nice if you can do more. The top tier, I have a few people doing it, and it's great fun. They pay $6.66 a show. And for this contribution, you get absolutely nothing other than the show a day early and without commercials. So, I mean, that is something. But I specifically decided to not provide any kind of perks or benefits other than a day early and without commercials, because anything I do might have to be disclosed as a potential conflict of interest or some other weird thing. Another interesting thing I had in the last week, one of my clients contacted me and they wanted to give money to somebody without being known that they were the one giving the money, and asked if I could help them do that. And they would just send me a check that I would cash, and then I would send that money forward to the person they want to give it to. In case anyone else comes up with this clever idea, no, I cannot help you with that. I'm terribly sorry. There are incredibly stringent rules about handling money from people, which is one of the reasons I tell people never send Phil money. Your money goes, if you're a client of mine, your money goes to TD Ameritrade. They are the custodian. They are the qualified custodian. They file all the legal documents and have all the protocols in place to track money coming in and going out and do all of that legally. I don't do that. And it could be a very, very serious breach of regulations if I were to take a check from somebody, cash it, and then send it to somebody else. Because if and when I get audited again, which it's just a matter of time, someone's going to go, so people are sending you money on top of the fee that you're collecting? I just can't go down that road. So I appreciated the intent, the spirit of it. Someone that had some money wanted to help out somebody that was struggling. And I think that's a very meaningful thing. And we've done some campaigns to raise money for organizations on this show, and we'll do some more coming in the spring and throughout 2020. So, if you want to do that, we can do that. But, something I can't participate in directly. You can't send me money. Please don't send me money. Every once in a while, someone will send me a check to deposit in their account, and I promptly rip it up, send it back to them, and tell them just to send it to TD Ameritrade. I don't even want to see them. I don't want to touch them. And anyway, that wraps things up. Hopefully, the segment on Schwab helped you understand about what may happen and when it might happen. And in general, I'm not concerned, although things can always go wonky. I think it's going to be just fine, and it's going to take a while for anything to really happen. Hopefully you learned about Fundrise and found that interesting. Let me know. If you learned something about trusts, let me know. Maybe we can have John or some other attorney on in the future to talk about that. And of course, if there's a segment that you would like me to cover, some topic that hasn't been covered recently, I've done the show long enough that I sometimes think, I covered that, but it might have been 3 years ago, and a lot of you are new in the last 3 years. So just let me know. You can send those suggestions to me via email at phil@polarisfinancialplanning.com. If you have questions about your investments, you can also contact me there. Do not in your first email send me statements, documents, social security numbers, payroll stubs, tax records. Just don't do it. Just send me an email. Say, hey, Phil, can we talk? Please include your phone number. If I have a few minutes, I might call you. If it's a simple question, we can just talk about it then. If it's something more complicated, we can set up a time. No fee, no cost. I might have to delay it or push it out a week or two, especially with Christmas and the end of the year coming. Who knows? But it's a service I want to provide to people that maybe don't have enough funds to actually hire me. So if that's something that can help you, please feel free to take advantage of that. Just understand that I might be busy at that moment and it might take me a while to get a hold of you. If you send me an email and I don't respond in a day or two, send me a follow-up email. Sometimes shit gets lost because I get a lot of emails. So I apologize in advance if I don't respond right away. I'm going to wrap up the show. Thank you so much for listening. And I hope to see you out there somewhere on the road in 2020. Until then, ciao.
Sexual advances are not appealing. In fact, I'm starting to get the uh-oh feeling. And my mama said my special parts are just for me. So why in the world are you trying to creep?
Stop! Don't touch me there. This is my no-no square. Stop! Don't touch me there. This is my no-no square.
My square takes a lot of nerve. Who do you think you are, you freaky deaky perv? There's a dude with some candy in a shady old van. I think he wants to mess with my purity plan.
Stop! Don't touch me there. This is my no-no square. Stop! Don't touch me there. This is my no-no square.
My square's not a circle or a period or a dot. It's just my one little very old spot. So keep your grubby little dirty little hands off me while I want to respect my privacy. I just want to be left all alone, so step off me and go back home. I tell you again, if you're not aware that this is my own no-no square.
Stop! Don't touch me there. This is my no-no square. Stop!